You ever notice how the moment someone starts doing the exact opposite of what they're known for, it throws you off? That's the first signal something deeper is happening, especially with someone who has an avoidant attachment style. See, avoidants live by an internal code, one that was built long before you ever entered their life. That code says, don't get too close, don't depend on anyone, don't let them see the real you. It's not personal, it's protective. It's a survival system crafted out of early emotional wounds from experiences where love felt conditional or unsafe. But when love starts creeping in, and I'm not talking about casual attraction, I mean real emotional resonance, the avoidant begins to violate their own internal rules. Not for show, not for manipulation, but because something in them is being rewired without their conscious permission. That's when you'll see the first signs of a quiet transformation. They start texting you first, randomly, not because they need something, not because they're bored, but because you're on their mind and they can't ignore it anymore. And they hate that. It messes with their illusion of independence. But they do it anyway. That's the key. You won't see grand gestures or declarations. You'll see micro betrayals of their emotional armor, actions that go against their usual rhythm. That's the giveaway. And here's the deep truth. People don't break their patterns unless something stronger than the pattern pulls them. That something stronger is emotional gravity. It's love, but love filtered through the avoidant lens. Awkward, hesitant, and laced with internal resistance. Yet it's there. And when you spot it, it's undeniable. Psychologically, avoidants operate from what we call a deactivating strategy. They push down their feelings. They minimize connection. They focus on flaws to justify distance. But when that strategy starts to fail, when they begin overriding it on their own, not because you're forcing them, that's the real moment of revelation. That's when love is no longer a theory, it's a behavior. You'll hear them say things like, I don't usually do this, or I'm not the type to open up like this. Pay attention to those lines. They're not small talk. They're confessions from someone in conflict. An avoidant in love is not at peace. They're in a war between the part of them that wants to run and the part of them that's already anchored to you. The fact that they're showing up at all, the fact that they're even trying, that is monumental. And yet, this is where most people make a tragic mistake. They miss these small shifts. They overlook the courage it takes for someone wired for distance to lean in. Because it doesn't look like what the movies show you. It doesn't look like the fairy tales. It looks like hesitation, like awkward attempts, like being present but fidgeting, like sending a message and then disappearing. But behind all that is love trying to sneak past a lifetime of emotional walls. What most people don't realize is that avoidants don't fall in love the way others do. They don't run toward love. They resist it. They test it. They push it away. And when it refuses to leave, when it proves it's not a threat, that's when they surrender. Little by little, not all at once, and certainly not with fireworks, but if they're breaking their own avoidance, initiating contact, showing up emotionally, staying longer in conversations than they're comfortable with, that's not confusion. That's not friendliness. That's love in a language most people never learn to read. Love doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers through cracked behavior. And if you're lucky enough to witness an avoidant choosing connection over protection, even just once, pay attention, because that moment is rare. That moment is sacred. That moment means you've reached a depth inside them most people never even get close to. So remember this. When an avoidant starts breaking their own rules, not for attention, not for validation, but quietly, consistently, and against their own fears, they're already in love with you. Even if they can't say it. Even if they'll never say it. The truth of love isn't always in the words spoken. It's in the walls someone is willing to break just to let you in. We live in a world that glamorizes loud love, over-the-top affection, dramatic gestures, constant communication. But when it comes to avoidantly attached individuals, that kind of expression is almost non-existent. And that confuses people because we're conditioned to think that love must look a certain way. If it's not frequent texts, public declarations, physical closeness, then it must not be real. But what if I told you that with avoidance, the realest love looks like quiet consistency? See, avoidants don't operate in the currency of emotional highs. They're not looking to get swept away. In fact, they're terrified of being consumed. Their nervous system is calibrated to protect their autonomy at all costs. So when they fall in love, it won't look like an emotional flood. It will look like structure, like routines, like a steady presence where there used to be distance. It will look like them showing up, not in explosive ways, but in reliable ones. And that's where most people miss it. They're waiting for the fireworks, not realizing they're standing under a steady flame. And that flame is everything for someone who's been avoiding emotional intimacy their entire life. Break this down psychologically. Avoidants often developed their attachment patterns in childhood environments where their emotional needs weren't met consistently. They learned, if I get too close, I'll get hurt. If I rely on someone, I'll be disappointed. So they build identities that revolve around control, independence, and emotional distance. But when they start feeling emotionally connected to you, something unusual happens. They start to prioritize your emotional world, even if they don't fully understand it. And because they don't know how to say I love you in the traditional way, they'll do it through what feels safer for them, through actions. Small, thoughtful routines, subtle acts of care. They'll remember your schedule. They'll fix something in your home without being asked. They'll show up at your door with groceries because they know you've had a long day. They'll do all this without needing praise. Why? Because in their world, love is a verb and consistency is their quiet confession. Now, here's where it gets deep. For avoidance, consistency is uncomfortable. It pushes against their fear of vulnerability. It challenges their instinct to withdraw when emotions run high. So if they're still showing up, even when it's hard, even when they're unsure, that's not passive behavior. That's active resistance against their internal programming. That is love taking form, not in the way they were taught, but in the only way they know how to give it. Think about it this way. When someone shows up in the exact same rhythm every time, despite the emotional chaos inside them, you're witnessing courage, not comfort, courage. Because they're pushing against every voice in their head that tells them to pull away, to guard their heart, to stay in control. That's not weakness. That's a battle they're fighting for you. And most of the time, you'll never even see the war. You'll just see the pattern, the presence, the reliability. And this is important. Don't confuse their quiet presence with emotional laziness. It's the opposite. For them, showing up consistently is emotional investment. If they're choosing to include you in their structured world, if they're creating space in their life for you that they didn't create for anyone else, that's not routine. That's intimacy in disguise. You want to know how to know an avoidant loves you? Watch their patterns. Are they consistent? Are they predictably available, even in small ways? Are they slowly building a rhythm with you that doesn't rely on drama or attention? That's their love language. Not chaos, not adrenaline, not texts at midnight followed by ghosting, but structure, steadiness, space made intentionally for you. Most people crave the fire, but with avoidance, love is the earth beneath your feet. It's grounding, it's deliberate, and if you can understand that, you'll stop doubting whether they care and start realizing how they care. So don't wait for the perfect words or the ideal moment. Don't expect the same expressions you get from someone else. Learn to listen differently. Learn to feel the truth behind their structure. Because if they're offering you consistency, especially when their fear tells them to disappear. That's not just a habit. That's their way of saying, you matter more than my fear. And there is no louder I love you than that. One of the biggest misconceptions people have when dealing with an avoidantly attached person is assuming silence means indifference, that emotional distance equals a lack of care. But nothing could be further from the truth. When an avoidant is truly falling in love, one of the most profound things they do without even realizing it is begin to reveal the parts of themselves they've kept locked away their entire life. Avoidants are masters of compartmentalization. From a young age, they learn to survive emotional instability by hiding their feelings, by becoming self-reliant, guarded, controlled. So when they grow up and enter relationships, they don't just fear vulnerability, they strategically avoid it. Not because they want to deceive you, but because they've equated opening up with danger. In their emotional dictionary, vulnerability equals exposure, and exposure equals pain. So when someone like that, someone who has spent decades hiding their emotional wounds, suddenly starts sharing, that is not just an act of intimacy. That is revolutionary. That's not a moment, that's a breakthrough. You'll know it when it happens. It won't be loud, it won't be theatrical, but it'll feel like gravity. One day they'll casually mention something about their childhood, a story that holds weight. Another day they'll admit they were anxious before calling you. Maybe it slips out in conversation, how they shut down after their last breakup, or how they still carry shame about not being good enough. These aren't just stories. These are encrypted messages, emotional access codes. They're telling you without telling you, I trust you with this. And for an avoidant, trust is sacred. Trust is currency. Trust is not given. It is earned slowly, painfully. So if they're opening their internal vault, don't overlook it just because it wasn't gift wrapped in romantic language. Because that kind of emotional transparency is their way of offering love without saying it out loud. Let's dive deeper into why this is so powerful. When an avoidant starts peeling back the curtain, what they're really doing is rewriting the script they've lived by. The script that says, don't let anyone see you. Don't let anyone know you. If they see the real you, they'll leave. So when they start sharing their fears, their insecurities, their past, what they're really saying is, even if I get hurt, I'd rather be real with you. That is monumental. Philosophically, this is the kind of love that transcends ego. It's not performative. It's not about validation or approval. It's about surrender. It's about choosing closeness in spite of the internal alarms going off. And that choice, that internal override, is a form of love most people will never recognize, let alone appreciate. Because it doesn't look like fantasy, it looks like risk. The irony is, the more deeply they love, the scarier it gets for them. Because now there's something to lose. And if they still choose to let you in anyway, to let you witness their broken parts, their unfinished pieces, their emotional scars, that's love in its most raw and unpolished form. It's not poetic, but it's real. And the reality is this: avoidants don't open up emotionally because they should. They open up because something inside them changes in your presence. They feel seen in a way that doesn't feel invasive. They feel safe in a way that doesn't feel suffocating. That's what pulls them out of hiding. That's what allows the wall to crack. But, and this is important, don't expect this opening to be linear. Avoidance tests the waters. One step forward, two steps back. One moment of vulnerability, then silence. It's not manipulation. It's muscle memory. Their system is still recalibrating, still trying to reconcile the need for safety with the desire for connection. So if you see the window open, even just a little, don't slam it shut by demanding more. Instead, honor what they gave you. Because even the smallest confession from an avoidant holds the weight of 1,000 unspoken emotions. And that's your proof. That's the evidence you've been waiting for, not in their words, but in the courage it took for them to speak at all. So if you ever catch an avoidant sharing the unfiltered version of who they are, listen, not just with your ears, but with your heart. Because in that moment, you're witnessing something few ever get to see. The soul of someone who spent their whole life hiding, finally choosing to be seen. When an avoidant opens up emotionally, they're not just trusting you with a story, they're trusting you with their survival strategy. And that, my friend, is love speaking in its most vulnerable dialect. When you understand avoidant attachment at its core, you realize one simple truth. They don't fear love as much as they fear what love requires. Intimacy, vulnerability, dependence, all that spells danger to someone whose nervous system was conditioned to equate closeness with pain. And so they run. They disconnect, not because they don't feel, but because they feel too much and they don't trust what those feelings could do to them. But here's the shift most people miss. At some point, if love is real, if it's deep enough, consistent enough, grounded enough, there comes a moment where the avoidant is no longer running away from you. They're running toward their own fear because suddenly losing you feels more terrifying than letting you in. That right there? That's when everything changes. You won't always notice it at first. They may still be distant. They may still go cold after a beautiful night with you. They may still disappear for a few days to process. But underneath the surface, their internal equation is shifting. They're no longer convinced that isolation equals peace. They start realizing that silence doesn't protect them, it punishes them. And that avoidance isn't freedom, it's loneliness in disguise. So what do? They start coming back again and again, even if they don't know why. They linger in your presence a little longer. They check in. They give you pieces of themselves that they usually keep locked away. But more than anything, they start to stay, even when it's emotionally uncomfortable for them. That's the war. That's the moment where love becomes stronger than fear. And I want you to hear this clearly. This doesn't happen because they've become a different person. It happens because you've become significant enough to disrupt their entire defense system. Your presence has started to challenge their narrative that connection is unsafe, that intimacy leads to abandonment, that love must always cost them more than it gives. Now let's talk about what's happening inside their mind. The avoidant is dealing with what psychologists call disorganized cognition. They are feeling love, but their brain interprets that love as a threat. So their internal dialogue goes like this. I want to be close, but closeness means pain. I want to open up, but opening up means losing control. I want you, but wanting you means you could hurt me. They are stuck between longing and survival. And this is where many people get confused or discouraged because they see that push-pull dynamic and assume it means the avoidant isn't serious, that they're playing games. But the truth is that internal war is evidence that love is already present. It's not a lack of emotion. It's a flood of it, a flood they were never taught how to manage. When they start choosing connection despite the panic in their nervous system, despite the voice in their head telling them to shut down and run, you are witnessing one of the most courageous acts a person can offer. They are choosing to stay present in a relationship where their trauma tells them to disappear. That is not weakness. That is a transformation in progress. And it might not look clean. It won't be easy. Avoidants are slow burners. They open their hearts in phases. And every step toward you is also a step away from the only emotional strategy they've ever known, control. So if they're calling when they used to ghost, if they're explaining why they needed space instead of just vanishing, if they're leaning in after conflict instead of pulling away, that's not just growth. That's love showing up in raw, unpolished form. And here's the deepest layer of this. When the avoidant starts fearing your absence more than your closeness, they're not just falling in love with you. They're starting to believe on some level that maybe this time They won't be destroyed by intimacy. That maybe this time, connection could be safe. You've now become the exception in a world full of people they've emotionally kept at arm's length. That kind of love doesn't scream. It doesn't show up with flowers and poems. It shows up in the war between their instincts and their intentions. And when intention wins, even for a moment, even in the smallest gesture, it is everything. So don't just look for signs of love and how someone acts when it's easy. Look for how they show up when their entire system wants to flee. That's the signal. That's the shift. That's when you know they're not just falling for you. They're trying to become someone who can keep you. When fear starts to retreat in the presence of love, you're witnessing transformation. And when someone who's wired to run starts choosing to stay, that's not confusion. That's commitment in its rawest, bravest form. Most people think love is proven through grand gestures, public declarations, constant closeness, dramatic emotional highs. But the truth is, real love, especially from someone with an avoidant attachment style, doesn't always show up wearing a spotlight. It shows up in the smallest cracks of their routine. And one of the clearest signs an avoidant is falling in love is this. They start remembering the little things, not because they have to, but because they can't help it. Now, this might not sound revolutionary at first. Remembering details, that seems basic, right? But when you understand the psychology of avoidance, you realize how deeply significant that shift is. Avoidants tend to be self-focused, not selfish, but self-protective. Their mind is wired toward survival, toward emotional detachment, toward staying in control. So when they begin to focus on you, your world, your habits, your preferences, your pain, it means something inside them is reorienting. You suddenly become part of their internal map. You occupy real estate in their mental space. That's not casual. That's commitment happening beneath the surface before they even realize they're in it. So let me make this clear. When an avoidant starts remembering your coffee order, when they bring up something you mentioned in passing weeks ago, when they check in on a situation you thought they forgot about, that's not just thoughtful behavior. That's emotional encoding. You're not just someone they see occasionally. You're someone they're now tracking emotionally, whether they admit it or not. This is where the depth comes in. Avoidants typically regulate their emotional energy by staying detached. They don't allow themselves to mentally carry people because that requires emotional bandwidth. But when they love you, suddenly that bandwidth expands. You're no longer a passing figure in their life. You become an anchor, and their brain starts to reorganize around your presence. Think about that. Someone who has built an entire identity on not needing anyone, on keeping everything surface level, now begins to emotionally invest in the details of your life. Why? Because love has a way of bypassing defenses. It doesn't crash through the door. It seeps in quietly, through cracks, through details, through moments they didn't expect to care about, but suddenly do. And here's where most people overlook the signs. They're waiting for a dramatic confession, a romantic explosion. But love, especially from an avoidance, most visible in what they choose to remember. Because remembering is a form of reverence. It says, you matter enough for me to hold space for you, even when I'm not with you. And for someone who spent a lifetime holding space only for themselves, that's profound. You might see them bring up your favorite show before you do. Or they'll subtly adjust plans because they remembered you had a stressful week. These are not just nice gestures. These are psychological shifts. They are beginning to weave you into their reality, and it's important to understand. They're not doing it for praise. They're not doing it to be impressive. They're doing it because the connection is now part of how they see the world. They've begun to internalize you. That's the most powerful level of attachment there is. Because once someone is internalized in your mind, their needs, their energy, their presence starts to influence your behavior without you consciously thinking about it. For an avoidant, that's massive. That's love rewriting their default mode of operation. But let me warn you, Don't expect them to explain any of this. They probably won't. In fact, they might not even realize they're doing it. Love for them is often subconscious before it's conscious. It shows up in actions long before it shows up in words. And this is where you need emotional maturity to see beyond the surface. When you notice an avoidant remembering your fears, your preferences, your stress triggers, your dreams, that's not random. That's love choosing to notice what it once avoided. That's love taking up space in someone who has spent their whole life trying to keep their space to themselves. So don't overlook it. Don't underestimate it. Don't ignore those moments when they say something small that makes you pause, because those moments are the clearest indicators of something much bigger happening beneath the surface. There's a moment with avoidantly attached people that catches almost everyone off guard. It's not the moment they pull away. That's expected. It's the moment they stay. The moment they don't run when things get emotionally messy. The moment they sit with you, even when they're uncomfortable, even when their instinct is to retreat. That moment when they choose to be present despite their fear is one of the most powerful indicators they're already in love with you. Avoidants are wired for escape. That's not an insult. It's a psychological truth. Their emotional blueprint was often formed in an environment where being vulnerable was dangerous or unrewarded. So they developed a reflex: distance equals safety. They don't process emotions like others do. They compartmentalize, they intellectualize, they avoid. And when intimacy starts to rise, their first instinct is to bolt, not because they don't care, but because caring too much is terrifying. But here's the shift. When they love someone deeply enough, when a bond has formed that touches them beneath the surface, that instinct to run begins to battle with something unfamiliar, the desire to stay connected. They start wrestling with themselves. And if they're showing up for you during emotionally intense moments, if they're still around when you're falling apart, when you're upset, or when you're simply being real and vulnerable, understand what that means. It means their love for you has grown stronger than their fear of intimacy. That's not a small thing. That's a complete reversal of their survival strategy. It's them choosing discomfort over detachment. That's like asking someone who's been afraid of fire their whole life to sit next to it, warm their hands, and not flinch. It's hard, it's confusing, it's unfamiliar, but they do it because you matter more than their comfort zone. And here's where it gets deep. Love for an avoidant is not felt in the highs. It's tested in the lows. It's easy to show up when everything is calm and light and pleasant. But when things get raw, when you're vulnerable, emotional, or triggered, the avoidance system usually screams, "Get out!" And yet, if they're sitting beside you without trying to fix you or flee from you, that is radical intimacy for them. Because presence for someone wired to withdraw is not passive, it's intentional. It's a choice they're making in real time. And it's not always graceful. They might be quiet. They might seem tense. They might not know what to say. But they're there. And that presence speaks louder than any love letter ever could. Psychologically, they're overriding their autonomic responses. Their body may feel threatened, but their spirit is choosing to lean in. And that's not about impulse. It's about growth, about evolution. And love is the only force powerful enough to push an avoidant through that kind of transformation.